Ever heard of comfort women? Well, the name is as misleading as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Welcome back to History Time Machine, where we unearth the most shocking and untold stories from the past. Today, we're peeling back the layers on the lives of comfort women who were forced into sexual slavery during World War II by the Japanese Imperial Army. We'll explore the chilling facts, the courageous testimonies, and the haunting medical consequences that still echo today. Stick around to the end, because this isn't just a history lesson. It's a call to action. We're exposing the truth that governments have tried to sweep under the rug, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why this story needs to be told, now more than ever. Let's set the stage. The year is the 1930s, and the world is on the brink of a conflict that would redefine humanity, World War II. Amidst this backdrop, the Japanese Imperial Army establishes a system that would become one of the most egregious human rights violations in history. The term comfort women is coined, a euphemistic label that belies the unimaginable suffering it would inflict on countless women. Now, you might be wondering what could possibly justify such a system? According to official documents and statements from the Japanese Army, the system was established for three primary reasons: to prevent sexually transmitted diseases among soldiers, to deter rape and sexual assault on local women, and to boost the morale of the troops. Yes, you heard that right. The well-being and morale of soldiers were prioritized over the basic human rights of women. This was not just a system. It was an institutionalized form of gender-based violence, sanctioned and organized by a government. The term comfort women often evokes images of Japanese women, but that's just scratching the surface of a much darker, more complex tragedy. This wasn't confined to one nationality. It was an atrocity that knew no borders. Women from Korea, China, the Philippines, and even Dutch women born in Indonesia, a colony of the Netherlands at the time, were caught in this nightmarish web. When the Japanese invaded Indonesia, these Dutch women were also subjected to the same horrors. So let's be clear, this was not a localized issue. It was a human catastrophe that spanned continents and cultures. The recruitment methods for these women were as varied as they were deceptive. Some were kidnapped in broad daylight, others were trafficked under the guise of employment opportunities, and still others were taken under false pretenses, told they were serving as nurses or factory workers. The reality that awaited them was far more sinister. These women were not volunteers. They were victims of a system that exploited their vulnerability for the benefit of an army. Now, let's shatter a common misconception. While the term comfort women might conjure images of Japanese women being the primary victims, the reality is far more complex and international in scope. The first comfort station was not in any city in Japan. It was in Shanghai, China. That's right, the system that would later spread like a cancer across Asia had its roots in Chinese soil. And you might ask yourself, why the city of Shanghai? Well, it was under Japanese occupation at the time. Shanghai was not just a military hub, but also a testing ground for this dark experiment. The city's cosmopolitan nature and strategic importance made it an ideal location for the Japanese Army to implement and refine their comfort women system before exporting it to other parts of Asia. We're not just discussing a handful of isolated cases here. We're confronting a tragedy of staggering proportions. According to conservative estimates, around 200,000 Chinese women were forced into this horrific existence. To give you a sense of the scale, that's roughly the entire population of Salt Lake City, Utah as of 2021. But remember, each of these numbers isn't just a statistic. It's a human life. Each represents a woman with her own hopes, dreams, and family. Lives that were irrevocably shattered under the guise of military strategy and spurious justifications. While much of the discourse around comfort women focuses on Korean victims, the Chinese women who suffered are often left out of the narrative. This erasure is not just an oversight, it's a tragedy in itself. These women faced the same horrors, the same exploitation, and they too deserve to be heard, acknowledged, and remembered. The life these women led in the so-called comfort stations was nothing short of a living hell. You might think you've heard it all, but trust me, we're about to pull back the curtain on a dark world that remains largely unspoken. These stations were not places of comfort. They were dungeons of despair. Women were subjected to inhumane conditions, often servicing up to 40 men a day. Yes, you heard that right, 40 men a day. The term sexual slavery doesn't even begin to cover it. In the event that these women had the audacity to resist or failed to comply with the sadistic requirements of their captors, they were subjected to appalling forms of punishment. One such instrument of torment was the WWII, deceptively named the comfort chair. This chair was anything but comforting. It was specifically designed for invasive and degrading body examinations. Its structure featured a hollowed-out middle section where the women were forced to sit, completely exposed. These examinations were not only humiliating, but also life-threatening. If any gynecological issues were discovered, the women faced immediate execution. This chair, therefore, became synonymous with death and remains one of the most feared instruments among the comfort women. Another harrowing form of punishment is the su jiao nu, or four-legged cow. Contrary to what the name might suggest, this was not a physical device, but a cruel position where the comfort women were forced into a precarious position that left them balancing on all fours. Beneath them, razor-sharp knives were strategically placed. The stakes were life and death. If they faltered or collapsed from exhaustion, they would be impaled by the knives below, leading to a gruesome and immediate death. This was not a medical procedure by any stretch of the imagination. It was a calculated act of humiliation and torture designed to break their spirit. The physical and emotional toll on these women didn't end when the war did. The ramifications of their experiences had lifelong consequences, many of which were medical in nature. We're not just talking about superficial wounds here. These women faced reproductive issues that affected their ability to have children, and many were left with chronic pain that lasted a lifetime. The physical scars were a constant reminder of the horrors they endured. Now, you might think that in such a system, at least some measures would be taken to protect these women's sexual health. You'd be wrong. Condoms were supplied as a supposed measure of safety, but the grim reality is far more disturbing. Some Japanese soldiers went to the extent of deliberately tampering with these condoms, often by poking holes in them. This malicious act not only compromised the already fragile health of these women, but added another layer of cruelty to the existing litany of abuses they endured. And let's talk about the so-called medical checks. These weren't designed to ensure the well-being of the women. They were to keep the soldiers disease-free. The women were routinely screened for sexually transmitted infections. If diagnosed, their treatment was far from compassionate. They were administered Compound 606, also known as Salvarsan, a treatment for syphilis. Preparing this drug was a meticulous process. Doctors would first dissolve arsenic in methanol, then blend it with distilled water and a touch of sodium hydroxide to create an injectable solution. For the actual procedure, the patient would lay face down, and the physician would methodically inject the solution into each lesion. Without any kind of anesthesia during the process, this treatment was agonizing. The intense pain, often unbearable, would persist for days. This brutal approach to medical care only intensified the suffering these women endured. In a world where voices were often suppressed, especially those of women, consider the immense bravery of Kim Hak-sun from South Korea when she came forward in 1991. She wasn't merely sharing her own traumatic story. She was giving voice to the countless women who had endured in silence. Kim Hak-sun became a pivotal figure, being the first to publicly identify herself as a comfort woman from World War II. Additionally, the story of Jan Ruff O'Hearn, a Dutch-Australian woman, underscores that this wasn't solely an Asian issue. Women from various ethnicities were affected. These women ignited a global conversation, challenging us to confront this dark chapter of history head-on. Their testimonies were not just acts of personal courage. They were catalysts for international dialogue on war crimes, gender violence, and human rights. August 14th is International Memorial Day for Comfort Women. It's not just another day on the calendar. It's a day of remembrance and advocacy. It's a day when we honor the resilience and courage of these women, and it serves as a stark reminder that the fight for justice is far from over. This day is marked by ceremonies, educational events, and advocacy efforts worldwide, amplifying the voices of survivors and activists alike. It's a day that challenges us to ask, what are we doing to prevent this from happening again? While Japan has made some strides in acknowledging its past, notably with South Korea, the efforts have been met with mixed reactions. In 2015, Japan agreed to provide $8.3 million to a fund for Korean comfort women and issued a formal apology. However, many argue that this is merely a drop in the bucket, a token gesture that doesn't fully address the scale and gravity of the suffering endured. And what about the rest of the world? The silence is deafening. Despite international pressure and UN resolutions urging Japan to take responsibility, there has been a glaring lack of formal apologies and compensation to comfort women from other countries. This absence speaks volumes, raising questions about the sincerity and comprehensiveness of Japan's efforts to make amends. The role of Japan's right-wing government in shaping the narrative cannot be ignored. Nationalistic sentiments and political agendas have often clouded the path to justice, making it a contentious issue within Japan and in its diplomatic relations. The government's stance has not only been a subject of international scrutiny, but also divided public opinion within Japan, creating a complex landscape that hinders progress. The shadows of the past continue to linger, especially for the few remaining survivors of this dark chapter in history. As of 2023, the numbers are stark. In mainland China, out of the staggering 200,000 women who suffered during World War II, fewer than 20 survivors remain. Taiwan recently mourned the loss of its last comfort woman, who passed away at the age of 92, representing the end of a line of 58 brave souls who once lived through the ordeal. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, approximately 20 survivors stand as the last testament to the 1,000 women who faced the same fate during the war. The sands of time wait for no one. With each passing year, the first-hand testimonies that shed light on this grave injustice are fading. The imperative to acknowledge and address this issue has never been more pressing. These women deserve more than just words. They deserve actions that echo through generations, ensuring that their stories are never forgotten and that history never repeats itself. And just like that, we're out of time. But remember, time may be running out for these women, but it's never too late for justice. This is the History Time Machine. We'll see you next time.